Hi everyone, I'm Kelly. I've always been an excellent student, but one day that almost came to an end. A new principal came to our school and said that some of us would get to try our hands at being teachers the following week. And I really wanted to do that, but I didn't get the chance and I had to keep being a student. My rival, however, got lucky. As soon as Sue pulled out the piece of paper with the word teacher on it, I realized I was finished. And I was right. Sue called me to the blackboard and asked me the most difficult questions that she could think of. This isn't fair. We haven't even studied this yet. You could really get any sort of question on the exam, so sit down. You're getting enough. And that was the first time I got a bad grade, ever. And undeservedly, too. After school, I went straight to the principal. Mrs. Jones, a terrible injustice has happened in our class. You have to solve your own problems this week. I left the office even angrier than I'd been when I walked into it. Since the principal had refused to help me, I decided to deal with this myself. And the next day, I waited until Sue had gone on a run around the stadium and I got into her bag in the locker room. And there it was, the teacher's handbook. They'd been printed out by the teachers specifically for that week. So I decided to make my classmates' lesson unforgettable. And I put a text that I'd printed out in her bag instead of the handbook. During the next class, instead of giving us a lecture on modern literature, Sue read us a popular conspiracy theory that said J.K. Rowling didn't exist and Harry Potter had been created by professional writers from all over the world. The class was dying laughing and Sue could only blink in confusion. Pretty pleased with myself, I got ready to go home when, all of a sudden, we heard an announcement over the speaker. Mrs. Stewart, please head to the principal's office. I rushed straight to Mrs. Jones's office. She must have finally decided to correct my mark. But the principal looked at me sternly and scolded me. Kelly, I saw the footage. Why would you get into someone else's bag and steal their important documents? My knees were shaking. It hadn't even occurred to me that someone else could have been watching me in the locker room. I just wanted to prank her a little. Jokes like that are unacceptable within the walls of this school. As your punishment, you'll spend the whole week teaching the remedial classes after school. Why was everything so unfair? But there was really nothing I could do. The next day, I stayed at school after classes. A flood of students poured into the classroom. They sat down at their desks and stared at me in curiosity. And I started talking about logarithms. But Sue's brother Cedric asked me to repeat myself again and again. I felt like a parrot. In the end, I really just couldn't stand it. Even my Pomeranian would have understood this long ago. Cedric flew into a rage, sweeping his textbooks off the table and storming out of the classroom. Everyone looked at me with accusations, and I suddenly felt very ashamed of myself. This guy had just really wanted to understand a new topic, and I'd snapped at him. I followed Cedric out, and I soon found him in the canteen. I'm sorry. Do you want me to explain it to you one more time? Look, I'm awful at math. It's not gonna be easy for you. And it really wasn't. At first, Cedric seemed to be so unteachable that I wanted to bang my head on the board. But then, something changed. He started to show more diligence, and our tutoring sessions began to bring the first results. Cedric accompanied me home and prepared pleasant surprises. Sometimes, while explaining theorem, I would catch him looking at me with admiration, and I'd lose track of my thought and start blushing. I might have liked Cedric, the brother of my worst enemy. It seemed like he would become my boyfriend soon. But then, one day, I accidentally overheard a conversation with him and his sister near the coffee machine. Cedric, just don't let me down. Do as we agreed. And don't you dare let Kelly find out about anything. I felt so humiliated and angry. His admiration had just been fake. Some part of a dastardly plan, probably. I grabbed my cup of coffee and I really wanted to throw it at that liar. But then another idea came to mind. I started teaching Cedric in a different way. I made mistakes and I passed them off as the right answers. And of course, he didn't suspect anything. It still took me a long time to come up with the wrong answers. I also kept teaching the other students who were lagging behind. So by the end of the week, I could barely think straight. And after what I'd heard near the coffee machine, I really hated Cedric for lying to me. But the next day, I heard some good news finally. There was going to be a Halloween party at school that evening. Classes ended earlier than usual, and we were sent to decorate the gym. I grabbed the paper bats and I spent several hours hanging them from the ceiling. When I got down, I realized I could barely stand on my feet. I urgently needed a break, just 5 minutes. My gaze stopped on the mats in the corner of the hall, and perfect. My eyes just closed by themselves, and I fell asleep. I woke up to someone shaking me by the shoulders. I reluctantly opened my eyes, and I saw Cedric. What do you want? Let's go, come on. The principal told everyone to come to the classroom at once, and we rushed out of the hall. Our classmates were already there. I sat down at the desk, and then something truly shocking happened. Our principal walked in wearing the costume of a prison officer. Everyone was stunned, and I couldn't help but laugh. Mrs. Jones had really chosen a strange Halloween costume. But then something even weirder happened. She said, "Change your clothes. Hurry up." I took the costume and I realized that it was an orange jumpsuit, just like the ones that prisoners in prisons wore. I changed my clothes and I looked in the mirror. Orange suited me pretty well. Feeling satisfied, I returned to the classroom, and the principal suddenly locked the door. "Now sit down. We're gonna write a dictation." Cedric and I looked at each other, pretty surprised. This was the first time a themed party was being held, so maybe it was supposed to start like that. We obediently took out our notebooks and pens and prepared to write something down. But then Mrs. Jones started dictating some really boring stuff. It didn't feel like much of a game. Everyone turned their papers in and the principal immediately rushed to check them. As always, I got a perfect mark, but Sue and Cedric had made a lot of mistakes. I was kind of glad they'd get bad marks, but Mrs. Jones suddenly jumped up to the siblings, grabbed their hands, and dragged them somewhere else. I felt scared and curious at the same time. I left the classroom, and I followed them. Mrs. Jones had stopped in front of the locker room. I looked around the corner, and I almost screamed in horror. Bars had appeared in the locker room, dividing the room into prison cells. The principal pushed both Sue and Cedric inside. They clung to the bars and started calling for help, but Mrs. Jones left a guard with them and went somewhere else. Even though Sue and Cedric had been plotting stuff against me, I'd feel bad leaving them like that. So that's why I came up with a rescue plan. I needed to distract the guard, and a fire alarm caught my attention. I turned it on, and the nasty sound swept through the school. It worked! The guard flinched and dropped the keys to the cell and rushed for the exit. As soon as my classmates were left unattended, I grabbed the keys and I opened the doors. Instead of thanking me for saving her, though, Sue started crying. "Why would you do that? Things are gonna be even worse now. Are you dumb? I saved you." But Sue was right. Mrs. Jones appeared out of nowhere and began scolding all of us, brandishing a baton. "I will not allow disobedience in my school. You will be severely punished." Before I could even get a word in, I found myself holding a brush in my hand. Cedric and Sue had them too. The principal dragged us to the women's bathroom and pointed to the sinks in the toilets. "In a half an hour, everything must shine like it's new." I squinted, pretty disgusted. Was this some kind of joke? But Sue and Cedric dutifully started scrubbing, and I had to join them. I put on my gloves, held my breath, and I got down to do the dirty work. When, all of a sudden, Sue shouted, "Ow! Mrs. Jones, my brush is broken. I need a new one." But instead of a cleaning brush, the headmistress gave her a toothbrush. Sue burst into tears. I couldn't stand it any longer. "You have no right to treat us like this. I'm gonna tell my parents everything." Oh, if only I kept quiet. Mrs. Jones called the guards on me. I was handcuffed and dragged somewhere else. I screamed with all my might and thrashed around trying to escape. The principal ordered them to sedate me. But then Cedric screamed, "Mom, that's enough. We won't do it anymore." I started choking on my tears, and I woke up. I was lying on the mats in the gym, and the handmade bats were hanging from the ceiling. It had just been a nightmare. I felt so tired that I didn't even want to stay for the party. I just decided to go home and get a good night's sleep. But sleeping really didn't help much. In the morning, I could not get the cells, the brushes, the principal looking like a jailer out of my head. But the real Mrs. Jones managed to distract me. "The week's over. It's time to find out what you all have learned." The principal gave us tests on all the materials we'd studied. I quickly nailed it and got an A+, but Sue and Cedric failed. Of course, that fool had written all the wrong answers I'd taught him, and Sue had simply copied her brother's work. I was over the moon. I'd managed to punish 2 of my enemies at once. I gathered my textbooks and left the school satisfied. But then I saw a strange scene near the entrance. Mrs. Jones was loudly scolding Sue and Cedric, and then she grabbed both of their hands and started dragging them somewhere. My breath caught in my throat. My dream had somehow come true. Out of curiosity, I decided to follow the principal and my classmates. But what I wasn't expecting was the 3 of them to stop in front of a small house. Sue opened the door and shouted to the principal, "Mom, grab the mail." I was shocked. Mrs. Jones really was my classmate's mom. I wondered what else from my dream would turn out to be true. I crept up to the house, looked through the window, and I recoiled in horror. Sue was scrubbing the floor in the room, and Cedric was washing the dishes. Mrs. Jones was just sitting in an armchair and painting her nails. I realized my dream had turned out to be prophetic. The principal was punishing Sue and Cedric for bad marks, making them work around the house endlessly while she was doing whatever she wanted. I felt so sorry for them. Even they didn't deserve to be treated like that. I decided that I would help them get rid of the tyrant, at least at school. The next morning, I went up to Sue and I handed her a document. Sign this. It's a petition for the resignation of the new principal. Huh? What are you talking about? Why would I sign that? Don't pretend. I know that Mrs. Jones is your mom and she makes you work all the time. If we kick her out, she won't bully you at school anymore. Kelly, I think you got this wrong. Our mother has a bit of a temper, but she's not a monster. She used to work as a teacher in juvie, and then she transferred here. She hasn't quite managed to get rid of her old habits and sometimes goes overboard with orders at home. Cedric and I got sick of it. We asked her to let us live with Dad for a little bit, and Mom suggested a bet. If we got good marks during the previous week, she would let us go to our dad for a whole month, but if we failed, we'd have to clean the whole house, which we did yesterday. That's a strange story, but what do I have to do with it? Why did you flunk me during the first class, and what are you doing with Cedric? I heard you discussing a plan. I wasn't planning on flunking anyone. I just wanted to learn from you, but I was too embarrassed to ask for help. That's why I chose the most difficult questions. How could I have known that you would start mumbling? I sent Cedric to you for extra classes to win the bet. He was supposed to memorize everything and pass it on to me. Then we could have successfully passed the test and gone to our dad. But my idiot brother couldn't even handle that. He just kept saying how cool you were. I broke into a smile. So Cedric hadn't been lying at all. He really did like me? I told Sue the truth about our tutoring sessions. They offered my help before she got angry. And that's how I started studying with Sue and Cedric after school. And they nailed the next test. Mrs. Jones was so happy, she allowed them to live with her father for a while. Sue and I became friends, and Cedric and I soon started to date. That's how I helped my classmates, and I realized it was stupid to believe in dreams. After all, if Sue hadn't told me the whole truth, I probably would have been kicked out of school for petitioning against the principal.